Hey guys, my name is Stephen Lowe, and I am the author of Overcoming Gravity. So be going over part 9 today, and part 9 is still in part 2 on constructing your workout routine, and chapter 9 is going over all of the stuff in regards to strength work. We have your types of exercises and exercise notation. I'm going over concentrics, isometrics, and eccentrics in regard to strength training and how to set those up. Then sets, exercise order, rest times, pair sets, and some other types of sets, tempo, core work, and then summarizing it all with some general recommendations. So types of exercises and notation. As I covered a little bit in chapter 2, I believe, concentric exercises, also referred to as dynamics in the book, are mainly exercises that are focused on the muscle shortening phase of the exercise. So obviously in push-ups, the muscle shortening phase is when you push up from the bottom of the push-up. Usually these are referred to with a specific tempo. It's the X in the 10XO tempo. And then these are expressed as sets of repetitions. So 3 sets of, say, 5 repetitions or 12 repetitions or anywhere in between. Isometric exercises obviously are where the muscle stays in the same length the entire time. So any of your planche or front lever or back lever type of holds where the muscles are staying uh, at the same length the entire time, but you're still exerting force. And these are expressed as sets. So, for example, 3 sets of 10-second holds. Eccentrics or um, eccentric exercises are where you typically work most of the movement in the muscle lengthening phase. For example, if you can't do a pull up yet, you may jump up to the top of the position and then slowly lower down as an eccentric. And usually these are expressed in sets as well, but usually in reps of how long the eccentric is done. 3 sets of 3 reps of, say, 5 to 10 seconds in the lowering phase of each repetition. And usually, if you're doing reps in a row, usually you state the amount of rest. If it's not stated, like for 3 reps of 5 to 10 second eccentric, usually if there's no rest, that means you jump back up and do another one. 3 reps of 5 seconds would be do a 5 second slow eccentric all the way down 5 seconds, jump back up to the top, lower again for 5 seconds, then jump back up and lower again for 5 seconds. And then there would be a rest time in between each of those sets. So, assisted concentrics and concentrics. Basically, in the book, I use a bunch of heuristics in order to give beginners a general recommendation. Obviously, if you're moving towards train beginner, intermediate, and advanced, they may not necessarily work as well. But in this case, this one does, and that is perform your maximum repetitions -1 and for 3 sets minimum. Obviously, there's some variation in this. The reason for the max reps -1 is it generally maximizes volume per set. It could be max reps -2. So if 10 reps is your max, if you go to failure in your first set, usually you get something like 10 reps, and then your next set, since you went to failure, your body might be more tired, so you might get 8 reps the next set, and after that, and then maybe like 7 or 6 reps after that. Going towards um, max reps to -1 would be 9. Usually allows you to get sets across in order to avoid failure. And maybe on your last set, maybe your third, fourth, or fifth set, you would hit failure at about 9 reps. You can also do like the 8 reps, as I said, max reps -2. So if you're going to failure, usually you get like say 10, 8, 6. So added up, that's 24 total repetitions. Whereas if you had went with max reps -1, 10 -1, you get 9, 9, 9. That's 27 repetitions. Usually helps to maximize the amount of reps in your workout while avoiding failure, which can increase fatigue so much that you start to drop reps at the end of sets. So that's why I made that recommendation. Obviously, anything for strength and hypertrophy training within about 3 to 4 reps to failure or reps in reserve is pretty effective. And usually through a cycle, you wouldn't maintain at 3 to 4 reps in reserve. You would move towards failure at the end because you're increasing your reps over time. And so, like, you can't always just keep adding reps to pull-ups. So, like, say you started with a 5 rep max of pull-ups, you'd start with 4 reps and then build up to 5, 6, 7. If you started with a few reps in reserve, obviously, as you increase the reps over time to, 8, 9, 10, you would be closer towards failure and you wouldn't just maintain that reserve. So, the reserve will go away anyway as you push towards failure and through a cycle, your Mesa cycle. And so it's not a big deal if your reps and reserves start to decrease at the end. You should be going towards and closer to failure as you get stronger, just by the natural progression of a cycle. So, assisted and modified concentrics, these are different various methods in order to make a progression harder or easier. Usually assisted is making it easier, but I wanted to discuss both. Examples, things that make exercises harder. You can use a weighted vest or ankle weights to make, say, like a tuck planche hold harder. Whereas if you were doing a um, tuck planche, advanced tuck planche, and you wanted to make it easier, you could use a counterweight pulley. So that would be like a pulley going up, over and then down, and it has some weight on the end, and you strap the other end to yourself, either around your waist or so, and that weight helps to uh, pull down some of your weight so that it helps to hold you up. Likewise, you can use bands, wrap around a pull-up bar, rings, and then under your waist. Or your feet area, and that can help to reduce the amount of resistance that your muscles are using in order to make a harder progression easier. In the book rule, I also include a general option for hypertrophy, which is beginners should aim for about 10 sets per muscle group for hypertrophy. And I do want to take that back a little bit. The modified one that I want to recommend is generally about 3 to 6 sets for pure beginners is adequate enough for strength and hypertrophy. About 4 to 8 sets for trained beginners, and about 6 to 10 sets for intermediates is approximately the optimal set range. As I've discussed before, the optimal set range will go up as you improve over time and your work capacity goes up. So obviously, like someone who is elite would have a much higher work capacity than those who are beginners or trained beginners or intermediates. So starting out with less and then adding more as you need it over time is effective. And using these ranges generally helps to prevent overuse injuries as well. So if a beginner jumped into 10 sets, some would be able to handle it, but some would be flirting with overuse as well. So I kind of want to stick to those ranges in general, just as you get stronger, and then you can add more as your work capacity increases as necessary. Okay, so isometric holds. Had a hard time fitting everything onto this slide in particular, but basically, in the when I came across strength training on Mad Cow's site, GeoCities site, back in the day, he had the concept of the Prilepin charts, and basically the Prilepin charts were made so that for Olympic weightlifters, so they could get an adequate stimulus in order to progress. Then I made my own for isometric exercises to help people progress. And then in the second edition of Overcoming Gravity, I basically made a huge chart of them in order to help people understand it more because it was very hard for them to understand the specific ranges and hold times in the chart I made. So I basically made it very specific. If your hold time is this, or if your max hold time is this, then you should do about this amount of hold time, this amount of sets, and so on. And so let's look at some examples on the next slide. So, as I mentioned, the Prilepin tables were initially made to get a training stimulus for those to improve with Olympic lifts, like your clean and jerk and snatch. Some other common methods that many gymnastics coaches use prior to me coming up with these tables are the 60-second method and aim for like 50% of your max hold. And so this would lead to an inordinate amount of sets, a cumbersome amount if your hold times were very short. So like if you can only hold like a 10-second tuck planche, that would mean you would aim for about 50% of that or 5 seconds and 12 sets of 5 seconds of the tuck planche. That's obviously too much and makes a workout extremely long to do. And so when I was coming up with these tables to find the best amount, basically I was aiming for a sweet spot where you get a training stimulus from the isometric holds, but you weren't doing too many sets and your holds weren't too long. And so, anecdotally, through my own training and coaching, I found about the sweet spot of a hold is about between 67 to about 75% of your max hold time. Obviously, there's some variability. It could be about 60 to 80%, but generally 67 to 75% seemed to be about the best range for most people. And so this basically was, as I mentioned, an attempt to balance intensity and exercise so that most people would get in about the 3 to 6 set range and about the 6 to 15 second hold range, which is sufficient for training stimulus to improve on the specific hold. And so, as an example, if we look back over the previous chart, if we had a 14-second max hold time, basically that would correspond to a 10-second hold and about 5 sets for that hold. So it's not an excessive amount of holds in like the 50% method for 60 seconds. If you had a 14-second hold time, you'd be aiming for a 7-second hold, and then you would be doing that for about eight to 9 sets. So that's way too much. Obviously, you can get a fairly good training stimulus with slightly longer hold and less sets. So that's how the Prilepin isometric tables work. So once you get your hold set, uh, your sets and holds, generally you're going to want to increase your time you're holding over time. So you'd aim for 10-second holds one workout, then you can aim to work towards improving those to 11 seconds, then 12 seconds, and so on. And so you don't necessarily have to keep looking back at the table. You basically aim for some type of linear progression with your set hold time increases, and that will provide the adaptation. You can always recalculate based on the charts. So if you made it up to 14 or 15 second holds and you're still progressing, you can potentially recalculate by doing a max hold again and then figuring out what your appropriate hold time and set times might need to be. All right, so cluster reps are often the most effective in regard to using eccentrics to progress with a given stimulus in order to get stronger, much like the isometric charts. And so an example of this would be 3 sets of 3 reps of 7 seconds eccentrics. So the cluster would be the 3 reps where you would lower for 7 seconds. So like with a pull up, you would jump up to the top with no rest, lower 7 seconds, and repeat 3 times for that whole cluster. Or so you do that and then repeat it for 2 more times. So I took my wife from about 1 pull-up to 12 pull-ups in 12 weeks with the cluster 5x5 method. The cluster method for pull-ups would be something like if you can do 1 pull-up, then you do 4 eccentrics, and then once you can do 2 pull-ups, you do 3 eccentrics, 3 pull-ups, 2 eccentrics, 4 pull-ups, 1 eccentric, and then once you can do 5 pull-ups, you don't do any eccentrics at all. And this method is fairly good at helping people get from 0 pull-ups up to about 5 pull-ups. So you have about um, 5 sets of five. Obviously, that can be too much for some. So I like to say about 3 sets, 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps of those clusters, and that tends to work fairly well. Likewise, one arm chins, for the majority of people, I've coached 2 1 arm chins. If they're using the eccentric method in order to progress to that particular exercise, usually doing about 3 sets of 3 reps of 10-second lowers on the arm will be close to, if not able to do a 1 arm chin. It's very rare that someone is very far away if they can do um, smooth slow lowering of 10 seconds, uniform speed of three reps in a row, and then also do that over 3 sets that they're not very close to a 1 arm chain. So in general, I do mainly like using eccentrics to break plateaus. I generally don't like them using as a main exercise, and the reason for that is that they are very intense on the nervous system and can put people in a bigger fatigue and recovery deficit. And so usually um, I do like them for mostly breaking plateaus, but if you are using them in a routine, I like them only to be one, maybe two at most eccentrics in a routine at a time. Otherwise, it's almost too much on recovery. All right, so covering sets and exercise order. So, as I've talked about before, most of the examples I've used have 3 sets of exercises, but there's nothing really special about 3 sets of exercise, even though it's become more of the standard in strength training. A lot of strength training programs use anywhere from like 3 to 5 sets, but there's nothing too special about that. Usually, anywhere between 2 to 5 sets is fairly effective, especially if you're doing 1 to 2 exercises in a routine for beginners and intermediates. And like I mentioned before, the 3 to 6 or 4 to 6, 4 to 8, and 6 to 10 set range for beginners, trained beginners, and intermediates tends to be best for the optimal volume to progress for them. And so, as long as you're keeping your exercises in that particular set range, you tend to be progressing fairly effectively. Intermediates in particular can usually jump to 3 exercises per muscle group. So, like with push, that would be dips, a push up or planche exercise, and handstand push ups. As you can see with the 6 to 10 set rep range, if you're doing 3 sets per exercise, usually you can go to 3 exercises in an intermediate range. And so that is one of the big benefits of the increase in work capacity. You can work potentially more exercises, or if you wanted to focus on specific exercises in order to get stronger at that specific exercise, so like more focus on dips or more focus on planche exercise, you can have, up to like 2 sets of 5 exercises for intermediates on those specific exercises. So that can be an effective way to really emphasize one specific exercise if your goals are more narrow. Whereas if your goals are more wide, you can have the 3 exercises spread out to 3 sets. Similarly, with exercise order, decreasing the quality of subsequent sets. So, like if you did pull ups and dips first, usually over time, the third, fourth, fifth exercises in a routine are going to be less quality. So, I give the example in the book, like the first exercise is usually like 100% quality. Next exercise is maybe like 98, 97. Then after that, 95, 94. So by the end of your workout, if you are training pretty hard, usually you're in the, 80s, maybe 70s capacity. You definitely like feel like you're more fatigued. And if you had gone back to like the first exercise, you definitely would not get as many reps as you did in the beginning. And so it's important to prioritize which exercises you want to improve on the most as the first, then the next one as a second, and then the next one as a third. So that's the main thing to keep in mind with exercise order. The ones that you want to improve on the most should go first. All right, rest times is still a fairly controversial thing in the training world, and Generally speaking, the for strength and hypertrophy, you want to do at least 3 to 5 minutes for compounds and about 2 to 3 plus minutes for isolations. So, why is 3 minutes fairly standard? I include in the book that you get about 50% ATP or muscle energy refill in your muscles at 30 seconds, about 75% at 60 seconds, 90 that should be 90% at 90 seconds, 95% at 2 minutes, and 99% at 3 minutes. So if you want to make sure that you're getting the full amount of quality and not be limited by your muscles' energy refill rate, to get the full amount of neurological stimulus for strength gains, as well as the full amount of stimulus for working your muscles through the full amount of repetitions, you want to do at least 3 minutes. So isolations can be a bit less, namely because it's not as important with compounds to not drop reps. So in general, the main concept here is that quality sets matter over quantity. There's a good Stronger by Science article on rep ranges for hypertrophy. They basically go over all the studies in regard to rep ranges, but then also cover it in regard to what they mean by like quality sets and maximizing repetitions, and they come to a similar conclusion. So if you want to look that up, I believe it's hypertrophy range factor fiction with Stronger by Science. Um, so in general, the reason why you don't use lower than like 2 minutes for hypertrophy training is that you can get the pump in a similar way by just using higher rep ranges. So, like, obviously, you're going to build up a pump in your muscle, such as bicep curls, if you're going to do incomplete rests, like, say, 1 minute between your bicep curl sets. But you can still build a pump if you went to higher reps. And we know that good hypertrophy training is generally in the 5 to 30 rep range from the scientific studies. And so, if you want the pump, it's better just to rest longer and do more repetitions rather than do incomplete rests and start to drop repetitions that you can't perform at the same weight. Likewise, some newer research may suggest that volume matched lower rest times. So, like if you're resting less than 1 to 2 minutes, or 2 minutes or less generally. If you're resting less than that, then you're it's as effective for hypertrophy as if you did like higher rest times and got as many reps in a certain rep range. Basically, you're adding more sets to make up for the fact that you're doing lower rest times, and so you're getting about as many repetitions. It's fairly the same for hypertrophy. The main reason why I wouldn't do it is basically you're adding on more sets when you could have just rested longer and not drop reps. And so it's just more efficient to rest long enough to make sure that you can get all the reps in the sets that you need and not just keep adding on more and more sets and going to more closer and closer to failure. So that's the importance of understanding that, oh yeah, you can get a similar hypertrophy stimulus if you just kept adding on some more sets if you're just starting to drop a ton of reps, but generally not worth it in regard to time as well. For endurance training, there's value in training incomplete rests. So generally about 30 seconds to 120 seconds or 2 minutes to increase metabolic adaptations. But there also complete rests help to maximize your sets on increasing your rep range. So, in general, if somebody is training for like a PT exam, physical training exam for like firefighter, the military, or whatever, usually I suggest some type of strength training, 1, 2 times a week to maximize for your ability to produce force. So like an individual push up is not, 50% of your max, but 30. That increases your maximum endurance. Then I also suggest some type of training on incomplete rests. So like going close to failure, doing a short rest, pumping out some more reps, taking a short rest, doing some more reps, as that helps build up the metabolic adaptations closer to failure. And then also suggest obviously doing some max sets where you just go for as high reps as you can, try to get into a rhythm, and all of these types of training put together help to maximize endurance adaptation. So it's important to do both. As you get closer to a specific test, then obviously you want to do more specific max endurance training and maybe cut out the strength work. But that's more specific to a test. All right, so different types of sets. So standard sets obviously are doing, say, push-ups, rest 3 minutes, and doing another set of push-ups, and so on. So paired sets are one way to save time, especially if you're doing a full body exercise. You get most of the benefit, probably about 85 to 95% of the benefit of strength and hypertrophy, while you save almost half the time. So the way to do this is, versus your standard sets, is to pair pull-ups with an exercise that does not overlap with muscle groups. So say squats. So basically, you do pull-ups, rest 1.5 minutes instead of three. Do a set of squats, then rest 1.5 minutes, then go back and repeat pull-ups, rest 1.5 minutes, squats, rest 1.5 minutes, etc. So there is still 3 minutes of rest between your pull-up sets, which allows you to get most of the energy. Obviously, your cardiovascular system and your body is a little bit more fatigued, so you can drop some reps here and there, which is why it's not optimal for strength and hypertrophy. But doing it does save half the time as you're able to compress two separate exercises in the time it took to do one specific exercise. There's also a misconception that you can kind of pair three things. So doing, say, pull-ups, rest 1 minute, then squats, then rest 1 minute, then push-ups, and then doing that. So that's more akin to circuit training. And then if you look at uh, the benefit of that, or like even if you do like pull-ups, rest 1.5, push-ups, rest 1.5, squats, rest 1.5, it actually doesn't save much more time unless you specifically reduce the rest sets down significantly. And so it's not actually more helpful, and you're more akin to get into circuit training, which is not as helpful for strength training specifically. And so that's why I don't recommend trying to do anything more than pairing two exercises. So there are a lot of other different types of sets out there. I'll just briefly cover them. Drop sets are basically doing the same exercise to failure, then dropping the weight, hence the name drop in sets, dropping the weight. So like biceps curls with 20 pounds, dropping down to 15, doing more to failure, dropping down to 10, doing more to failure, and so on until you hit a minimum weight that you're working towards. Supersets, usually alternating exercises with minimal rest and opposing muscle groups. So, for example, push ups and rows or dips and pull ups. Giant sets, very similar to circuit training, where you're doing compressing a lot of exercises into a small amount of time. So, say doing push ups, maybe short rests, pull ups, short rests, squats, and so on. Very similar to a lot of CrossFit metabolic workouts where you're doing a lot of different movements and compressing the rest and trying to do like as many rounds for time or such things. And then there's also myo-reps as well, which are basically aimed at the muscles, hence myo, where you aim for a set of, say, 10 reps, a weight you're using for your 10 rep max, but at the end of the 10 reps, you're just resting briefly, say like 10 to 15 seconds, and then trying to pump out three more reps, resting another 10 to 15, pumping out three more reps, and so on. So the reasoning behind myo reps is basically they found out for hypertrophy training, if you can maximize the amount of reps near failure, that allows for a slightly better hypertrophy stimulus. So, doing a full set, then short resting, then doing more reps, then resting a short amount, then doing more reps allows you to stay at that edge of failure, which can be helpful for hypertrophy. Um, in general, all of these types of sets can be useful for hypertrophy, but may run into quality issues. Obviously, drop sets, if you're doing a drop set with a bicep curls, for example, you're going to burn out your biceps so that the next set, if you're doing a second or third set, you wouldn't be able to handle, the 20 pounds again for as many reps. Similarly, with like supersets, you can have overlapping muscle groups, and so you're fatiguing your chest for with push-ups, and then you're doing rows, which also use some of your chest, so you're tiring yourself out, and your quality of your reps is going to drop, and so you drop reps from those specific sets. Similarly, with the short rest of giant sets, you're losing you're basically taxing your cardiovascular system more than your muscle system as you're starting to get fatigued with those. And so, generally speaking, I like standard and paired sets for strength and hypertrophy. If you're trying to do both at once, and standard sets and myo reps are typically what I recommend specifically for hypertrophy training. Okay, so getting into tempo and core work. We're almost there. Tempo, as I've described before, is the four phases of a movement. 1-0-x-0 is the standard. It's not 10 sets of zero or anything like that. The one is the eccentric phase for 1 second. So, say a push up, you're lowering down 1 second. You pause at the bottom for 0 seconds. The X is doing the push up as fast as possible and accelerating concentric. And a 0 second means zero pause at the top. So basically, you're going down for 1 second, no pause, push up really fast, no pause, down 1 second. So push-ups obviously go in this order, whereas pull-ups start with the concentric. So it's actually X010 for pull-ups, but in exercise notation, it's still written 10x0 even for the pulling movements. So that's the main thing. Already discussed a bit before that the accelerating concentric in part two is the best for strength and hypertrophy. So, not really going to cover some of the uh, multiple ways to manipulate tempo. Um, Different longer eccentrics can be helpful for hypertrophy phases where you're aiming for muscle damage, or in physical therapy or injury rehab where you're aiming to get control of movements and make the quality of movements better for stability and ensuring better motor patterns and some other things like that. So longer eccentrics can be useful, and similarly, longer concentrics or resting between the specific phases can be useful. But for our purposes, 10x0 is the best. All right, so core work compression may be effective if you are aiming towards certain exercises like the L-sit, the V-sit, and the mana, or straddle skills like straddle L, straddle pressed handstand, and things like those. And so I mentioned this specifically in strength work in the core section. As you can see at the bottom, there's a type of active compression work where you're trying to bring your knees closer to your face so that you can work on the V sit without actually, getting specifically into the V sit, or like a straddle where you're not specifically doing the movement, which may be limited by, triceps or arm scapular depression strength. And so, if you have those goals, compression work is very useful. But if you don't, you can just do any other core work that gets you towards your goals. Mentioned weighted decline sit-ups here, with like a dumbbell or plate on your chest. Those are extremely good for hypertrophy. So if you have like ab hypertrophy goals, that is one of my recommended exercises. For body weight, other good exercises are hanging leg raises, using an ab wheel. You can also use rings cables to do the ab wheel motion. reverse hypers, or even various levers or alternative levers like dragon flags can be good for core work as well. So lots of different options. If you are working towards some of the upper level like skills like Visa and Mana, then it can be helpful to specifically do some core compression work. All right, so to cover what we went over, general recommendations, since this is a very long video. Basically, types of exercises, I tend to recommend mostly concentrics. I prefer eccentrics mostly as plateau breakers or helping to work into the next specific exercise. Isometrics can be added depending on goals, especially if you want to work towards the isometrics. Set ranges, generally about 2 to 5 sets per exercise. And with a main routine, we're going to aim for 1 to 2 exercises to start. Most beginner routines will have about 1 to 2 exercises per muscle group. Maybe 3 exercises for intermediates, but for most people, creating a routine for the first time is just going to be about 2, 3 sets of exercises for 3 sets to start. For the exercise order, align it to your goals. So put the most important exercise first, then second, and then third, most important third, and so on. Rest times, we're mainly aiming for 3 to 5+ minutes for compounds, and then 2 to 3 for isolations. You can go shorter or longer for endurance depending, and usually you want to work both for those. The reason for a longer compound up to like 5+ seconds, as you get stronger, the muscles might not necessarily be the limiting factor. It can be the neurological system recovery, which can be, if you're like heavy deadlifting, can be up to like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes before you do another deadlift set. So the longer you've been training generally. All right, set types. I prefer standard or paired for strength and hypertrophy. Paired can be used to save time and get generally most of the quality that standard would, and while cutting a workout routine in about half. And then standard and myo-reps I tend to like for hypertrophy. Tempo, the 10x0 tempo is preferred. Other tempos may be applicable to different goals or rehab or things like that. And then for core work, also align it to goals. Compression work specifically, included in the book work, therefore, is specific to specific goals like VSIT and MANA and other things like straight arm press handstands. So if you do have those goals, compression can be very useful. So that covers most of the concepts in regard to strength work. We'll cover some of the progressions between workout to workout in the next video.